All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to jump into a new game.
Well, today's a bit of a unique one.
No.
Yeah, we're looking at a game that's had, well, a pretty dramatic evolution during its development.
I do love to see how games change over time. Sometimes those changes are, well, more drastic than others.
Yeah, and that's putting it mildly. This game started as a fairly straightforward farming simulator called Farm Folks.
Okay, I'm intrigued, Dory. Farm Folks.
Yep, but now it's evolved into something with, well, time travel, resource gathering, even a dystopian future thrown in for good measure.
Whoa. Okay, that's quite the leap. From tending crops to, what, saving the world?
Pretty much, and that's actually the big question looming over all of this, with such a drastic shift in, well, everything the developers are grappling with, whether the name Farm Folks even makes sense anymore.
I can see how that'd be a tough call.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got this game that's trying to, bridge the gap between those cozy farming vibes and, well, this intense sci-fi action. Not exactly an easy balance.
Exactly, and we're going to try to make sense of it all. For this deep dive, we've got developer notes, forum discussions, even some early gameplay footage.
So we're going right to the source. I always appreciate that. Gives us a much clearer picture.
For sure. So starting at the beginning, the initial Farm Folks concept was, well, pretty classic farming sim stuff, planting crops, raising animals, that sort of thing.
Right. But even in those early stages, they were already drawing inspiration from games like The Sims and Satisfactory. They wanted to give players, that deep sense of personalization.
Yeah, like the ability to design everything down to the tiniest detail. Instead of just arranging furniture, you're setting up intricate farming systems, even building entire factories to, churn out resources.
It's an interesting take on those familiar mechanics, applying them to a, more rural setting. And they were really focused on this seamless, minimalist design, like everything just integrated smoothly into the world.
Yeah, no, clunky menus or anything. And it goes beyond just the visuals. The world itself is supposed to be incredibly dynamic. They've talked about a full day-night cycle, seasons changing around you, weather patterns shifting seamlessly.
So it's about making the world feel alive and, responsive, not just a static backdrop for your farm.
Exactly. And then they've got this whole cast of NPCs with their own stories and relationships. You can form bonds with them, help them, rebuild their lives.
A little bit of Stardew Valley in there, maybe? The townsfolk are a huge part of that game's charm.
Yeah, definitely some of that. Players can even watch NPCs start businesses that, grow and change within the game world. Adds a whole other layer to the, community aspect.
Sounds like they were really building a rich and immersive world, even before all the, sci-fi stuff came into play.
Right, but then bam, everything changes. Out of nowhere, these mysterious entities called phantoms start appearing.
Phantoms, huh? Not exactly your typical farmhand.
Yeah.
So where do they fit into all of this?
Well, from what we've gathered, these phantoms aren't just random monsters, just thrown in for combat. They're actually tied to the lore, specifically to the reckless experiments of a fictional corporation called X Corporation.
Okay, so we're already getting into some deeper narrative territory.
Yeah.
Corporations, experiments, phantoms, definitely not your average farming sim anymore.
Nope, not at all. And those experiments, well, they lead to the emergence of time portals and, boom, we're suddenly thrust into a full-blown sci-fi mystery. It's quite the leap from those peaceful fields and, barn animals.
A bold move, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, taking a genre known for its laid-back gameplay and injecting it with, this high-stakes sci-fi element, you don't see that every day.
Right. And get this, through these time portals, players discover that the world is, well, heading towards a pretty bleak future. We don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but the developers have used the term dystopian, so.
Dystopian, huh? That word gets tossed around a lot these days. I'm curious to see what they mean by that specifically. Is it environmental collapse, societal breakdown, something else entirely?
It's definitely a question we'll have to keep in mind as we, learn more, but this is where the time travel mechanic really comes into play. It's not just a plot device. You can actually travel to the future, alone or with friends, to explore this, crumbling world, gather resources, and face off against those phantoms.
So it's not just about preventing this dystopia. It's about surviving in a world where it's already happened. That adds a whole other layer to the, the resource management aspect.
Yeah.
You're not just stockpiling for your farm. You're trying to salvage what you can from a dying world.
And what's really interesting is that the developers are giving players a choice in how they approach this future. You can focus on peaceful exploration and like resource gathering, or you can jump into, intense missions and player versus player combat, fighting over those, scarce resources.
Ah, so they're catering to different play styles. You've got your folks who want that, chill farming experience, and then those who crave the action and competition. It'll be interesting to see how those different approaches affect the overall experience of the game.
Yeah, definitely. It's a lot to unpack, and we've only just scratched the surface.
Absolutely, there's so much more to explore here.
And trust me, it gets even more interesting from here.
Well, I'm all ears. Let's dive deeper.
Okay, so let's talk about the impact of player choice. And, the developers are really pushing this idea that your choices, like, actually matter. Like, what you do in the future actually shapes the present.
Yeah, that level of agency is, well, it's not super common, even in games that, really try to sell that your choices matter thing.
Right. It's not just picking a dialogue option or, like, choosing a branching path. Your actions have real consequences that, ripple across time.
Ambitious,
Yeah.
to say the least. Especially because, well, the developers have been pretty transparent about, their budget.
Yeah, they've straight up said they can't do a, crazy cinematic AAA level story, at least not right now with their current resources.
Which is, well, understandable. Better to be upfront about those limitations than, overpromise and underdeliver.
Totally. And their focus is really on, like, building a solid foundation first. That's evident in their commitment to the lore.
Ah, yes, the lore. They've mentioned wanting to create a world with, deep, meaningful lore, something players can really dive into.
And this is where things get a little, well, murky for me. We don't have a ton of specifics on the story itself yet.
Yeah, that makes you wonder how they're going to, like, balance that deep lore with this, player-driven narrative.
Right. Like, will there be, like, key events that are fixed, or is everything subject to change based on, what the player does?
It's a tough balance to strike. Give players freedom, but also, maintain a cohesive and engaging story.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the whole name change thing. With all this sci-fi stuff layered on top of the, farming sim core, does Farm Folks really capture the essence of the game anymore?
I see what you mean. It's like you see that name, Farm Folks, and you think, oh, this will be a nice, relaxing time tending my virtual crops. But then, bam, time travel, dystopian futures, resource wars.
It's a bit of a bait and switch almost, or, well, maybe not intentionally, but it does make you wonder if they might be, like, alienating players who are looking for a more, hardcore sci-fi experience.
True, those players might not even give Farm Folks a second thought. It's a tough call. You want a name that's intriguing, but you also don't want to mislead anyone, especially in such a crowded market.
Right. And on top of all that, there's another layer to this whole situation. Remember how we said the game had, well, a pretty bumpy development road?
Ah, yes. The original development team wasn't able to finish the game.
And the current team, well, they inherited a project that was, to put it lightly, in a state of flux.
A bit of an understatement, perhaps.
Yeah.
But it's commendable that they're committed to, honoring the promises made in that original Farm Folks Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah, especially considering they didn't receive any of that initial funding. They're basically starting from scratch financially, but they still want to fulfill those backer rewards.
That says a lot about their, dedication. They could have easily just scrapped everything and, well, started fresh. But they're trying to honor the legacy of Farm Folks, even as they, push it in this bold new direction.
For sure. But that brings up another wrinkle in this whole naming debate, right? There's this community of backers who, were drawn to the game because of that initial Farm Folks identity.
Right. Changing the name could feel like a betrayal to some of those early supporters, like they're erasing the game's history and, abandoning that original vision.
So it's a balancing act, trying to honor the past, embrace the future, and find a name that, works for everyone. Old players, new players, the developers themselves.
And a name that accurately reflects what the game actually is now, which is, well, far more than just Farm Folks.
It really highlights the challenge of evolving a creative project while still staying true to, your roots. It's something all creators deal with, whether you're making games, music, or, well, anything really.
It's that constant tension between, holding on to what made you unique in the first place and embracing change and growth.
Yeah, exactly. And in the case of this game, it all boils down to this. Stick with Farm Folks and hope people see beyond the name. Or go for a full rebrand and risk alienating those, early supporters.
There are definitely strong arguments on both sides. It's a decision with, well, pretty big consequences, and there's no easy answer.
Nope, no easy answer at all. And that's where we want to hear from you. What do you think? What kind of name would you choose for this game that, well, seems to have outgrown its Farm Folks title?
Would you try to find something that, captures both the farming and the sci-fi elements? Or would you go for something completely new, something that reflects this, well, this grand vision the developers have now?
I mean, think about it. A game where you build your dream farm, travel through time, and, maybe even save the world from a dystopian future. What name would do all of that justice?
We're really curious to hear your thoughts. It's a fascinating dilemma, one that goes beyond just, picking a catchy title.
It's about understanding the power of a name, how it shapes perceptions, how it can, well, make or break a game's success. And now we're going to take a quick detour into, brainstorming territory. We've talked about the challenges of finding a new name, but what about the creative side of things?
Oh, yeah, there are tons of possibilities. Thinking about names that could actually, capture this mix of farming, time travel, and, dystopian futures is kind of fun.
Right. So what if they really leaned into that time travel element? Something like, I don't know, Chrono Harvest or maybe Timeline Tillage.
Ooh, I like those. They have good, sci-fi feel to them, and you immediately get that sense of, time being a factor.
Yeah. They're catchy. Or they could go for something that emphasizes the resource management, that struggle to survive. What about Salvage the Future or, Reclamation Run?
Those are good, too. They really highlight those, the stakes. You're not just farming for fun. You're trying to, rebuild a broken world.
Okay, but here's the thought. What about the tone? Do they want to focus on that, hopeful side of rebuilding or lean into the darker dystopian themes?
Yeah, the name should definitely reflect the overall feel of the game. Seeds of Hope has a very different vibe than, say, Echoes of the Past.
Totally. Okay, but I got to throw this out there. What about something that plays with that contrast? Cozy farming meets gritty sci-fi. Something like Stardew Warp.
Stardew Warp, I like that. Or maybe even Harvest Moon, Eclipse.
Oh, that's good. I'm already picturing a logo, like a futuristic tractor beaming up a harvest moon,
Okay, but logo ideas aside, we should probably talk about the more practical stuff, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. A good name has to be memorable, easy to pronounce,
Yeah.
and ideally, unique.
Exactly. It needs to stand out in a sea of games and be something that, rolls off the tongue when players tell their friends about it.
What about searchability? If someone just hears the name, can they actually find it online?
Oh, that's a good point. No overly complicated names or anything that people might, misspell or confuse with something else.
So it sounds like finding the right name is this whole balancing act. Creative, memorable, practical, and something that, really captures what the game is all about.
It's a challenge, that's for sure. But it's also kind of exciting. They have this opportunity to, shape the identity of a game that's doing something truly unique.
That's what makes this whole thing so interesting to me. It's a reminder that games are always evolving, pushing boundaries, and finding ways to, surprise us.
And sometimes, that evolution requires a bit of a rebranding, a new name that reflects how far a game has come.
Well said. So we've explored the challenges, brainstormed some possibilities, talked about, the practical stuff. Now we want to throw it back to you.
What would you name this game? What parts would you want to emphasize?
We're really curious to see what you come up with. Maybe your idea will be the one that helps this game, really take off.
Even if not, it's still fun to think about, right?
Absolutely. This whole discussion, I think it highlights what makes being a part of the gaming community so great. We get to engage with these creative challenges, to think critically about, every aspect of a game, even the name.
It's those conversations, that passion that make it so special.
Exactly. So until our next deep dive, keep those creative juices flowing. Keep exploring those uncharted territories in gaming. And, well, keep playing the games that make you think.
And keep those name suggestions coming. We can't wait to see what you all come up with.